That's so boring.
There's a couple guys playing hard, the rest of them didn't care.
Yeah.
That was boring, everybody's commenting.
I know. It was pretty.
The other thing, if I add some of those rules to the regular NFL game. Oh, gosh. Not good.
All right, well, welcome this evening to the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, February the 7th, 2022. It's hard to believe there's already a week gone in this month. We only have one item on the agenda tonight, and that's a blight study and determination that's going to be presented to us tonight, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Your Honor, and I will immediately turn it over to Mr. Gress. I think we all know the area that we're going to be talking about here. It is essentially the single lot that currently has one tenant on it, and the worst kept secret in the world that Chick-fil-A would also like to be on that particular lot. Mr. Gress.
Thank you, sir, for teeing that up for me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight to discuss some of the work that staff has been doing as it relates to the redevelopment of this site here at what we refer to as the Raymore Gateway. Before I get into the specifics of the property we're here to discuss, I wanted to just give some perspective of where we're at and some of the history. So the Raymore Gateway is the entirety of this 32-acre site at 58 in Kentucky. Westgate cuts right through the middle of it. One of the more unique sites on 58 in the sense that there's different multiple development opportunities. The larger one obviously being the 23-acre tract over here for more of a master plan development. An infill pad site here adjacent to the scooters. There's still about a 1-acre pad site remaining after that development. And then a really unique redevelopment opportunity of some older buildings here at the southwest corner of the site. And I wanted to, relative to some of the history of what we're going to discuss tonight, relative to a blight study, back in 2016, actually, right before I joined the city moved forward with a city-initiated TIF redevelopment area for the area that you can kind of see highlighted in blue, which is just a small portion of the Gateway property. Within that was approximately 7 parcels with multiple owners, and as part of that, a blight study was completed for the area that you see outlined in blue. The city solicited development proposals from the development community for this site and did receive a couple of them. Through that process, though, the development that was moving forward actually did withdraw their application, and so that development application and then the actual TIF plan that we had proposed was never actually formally considered either by the TIF Commission or the City Council. And so that kind of brings us where we are today. What I wanted to focus on tonight was this parcel here, which was identified originally as Parcel 7, a property that I refer to as the AM corner of the Gateway site, just because its location within the greater context of the site. It's approximately 3 acres. It's highly, in terms of development, highly underutilized in the sense a very large parking lot, a much older building in terms of tenants and what they're looking for in properties nowadays, and just given its location within the city right on the front door of our community. As you all have heard, the worst kept secret in the world, there is active interest in what's identified on this drawing as Lot 1, just over a 1-acre site. And again, staff has had multiple conversations with the development group, the owner of the building itself, as well as the tenant to kind of negotiate a plan moving forward to get this project underway. So I'm excited to give some of those updates to you all this evening. What I wanted to talk about relative to the blight study and just kind of tee it off with some of the conditions of the property, which I'll share some pictures with you here. The site right now is in dire need of some attention physically, and I guess I'll back up here a little bit. Some of the challenges with the site is that the building right now is occupied by an existing tenant that has a lease with what I believe is 4 years remaining on their lease. And so part of the challenge with making this project a reality is an amendment to that lease, which would then free up this area of the parking lot, which right now the current tenant has a lease on. And so right now it's technically not available. So the ownership group and the tenant have been in kind of conversations back and forth over the last year with different options of how they could free up that space and allow the current tenant of that building to remain in place. In addition to that, the building itself is deteriorating physically. There's a number of outstanding code violations that we continue to deal with, property maintenance. I had a couple of really good conversations recently with Cass County Health Department on some health inspections that have taken place over the last 3 years. And based on those findings, which I won't go into the details this evening, but staff believes there are a number of other potential building code issues within that building as well, just based on the findings of some of those health inspections. And all that kind of boils down to, I'll share some of the photos here. This is a water heater that's on the outside of the building. As you can see, there's a tree growing through the foundation of the building out towards the back. This is a sewer drain towards the east side of the property that at one point was overflowing with a liquid. This was taken back in September of last year. What I didn't really think much of it at the time, but as you can see earlier this year, earlier last month, has since turned into a rather serious sinkhole. So another code issue that we're currently working with the property owner to address, in addition to a number of other property maintenance issues that exist here. I'll come back to this slide here in just a few moments, but what I wanted to kind of tee up was just the direction that staff believes we should head, and maybe get some direction from the council on next steps, which would be a formal blight study for the property. And before I get too far into this, I wanted to kind of pass out, which I would respectfully request back at the end of this meeting, just because it's not something that has been shared to the public yet, would be the layout in which the proposed development has submitted to the city for our kind of conceptual consideration. And this just goes to show that what has been proposed can easily coexist on this site while the current tenant remains in business, either through the duration of the rest of their lease or another time as determined by them. So, as I was explaining, the property owner and the tenant and the proposed development here that you see have all kind of been in negotiations on their own of trying to find a way to free up the property for development. And that's kind of been their portion of the project. What the city has been involved in is relative to the development process, any potential incentives that we could offer to remediate some of the blight that exists on this property, or any assistance that we can give to some of those property improvements. And the first step in that would be a formal blight study on the property to determine if the property meets the criteria to be blighted. And I've kind of outlined the criteria that is outlined in state statute. As you can see, insanitary or unsafe conditions, deterioration of site improvements, existence of conditions which endanger the life or property by fire or other causes, or any combination of those. And so based on the pictures that you've all seen tonight, in addition to others, in addition to some of the findings that we've had shared with us from the health department, staff does believe that there are blighting factors on the property. And so the next steps for the city would be to complete a formal blight study with our ED Council, Gilmore and Bell, to propose that then to the city council for their consideration. The process would essentially be a presentation on behalf of the property by Gilmore and Bell. It would take the passage of an ordinance by the city council, basically agreeing with the findings of that report that blight does exist on the property. And that study is key for a number of reasons. It would allow the city to determine whether or not it meets that definition, and then it allows the city the ability to use city funding mechanisms to then go in and help remediate that blight, either through redevelopment, remediation, property improvements, et cetera. But without that true finding of blight, it really restricts what the city can do in terms of assisting the development of this project. As I said, back in 2016, we did do a blight study for the entirety of that area that was outlined in blue. Given the passage of time since 2016 and the fact that we're kind of zeroing in on this specific property, it would be staff's recommendation to kind of go back and redo that through the lens of this specific property, and then bring that back to the city council for their formal consideration. More than likely, depending on your direction tonight, probably the first meeting in March of next month. So that would conclude my presentation. I'll pass it over to Mr. Fearborn, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does the council have any questions relative to the blight study portion of this? I'm going to kind of try to wrap that up in a bow for you all. Maybe, sir. This is a pretty complicated piece of property, and it has been a pretty complicated process to get to this point. The Blight Study is, as Mr. Gress said, what we would like to do with the Blight Study is get it up to date, put it through the lens, as Mr. Gress defined it, of just this particular two-lot portion rather than the entire 23 acres that we use for the Blight Study to begin with. Chick-fil-A has indicated that they are going to be looking for some incentives to develop these two lots, but so far those have been, their passes on those are exceptionally limited as far as what they want to do with it and what they will actually be asking for this valuable piece of property. The process that has existed up to now, since Chick-fil-A has expressed an interest, has been kind of conversation between us and Realty Income, the owners of the property, has been a "we told you so" several years ago on this property. At the time, of course, Realty Income is huge. At the time, this wasn't on their radar. It's certainly on their radar now because of the prospective tenant in Chick-fil-A and anybody who they would draw to this particular piece of property in the future. Realty Income is very interested in getting Chick-fil-A in there. The problem that has existed is the current tenant that is in there, their lease includes the entirety of the parking lot. So what Realty Income has been trying to do, along with Chick-fil-A, is get to a spot where the existing tenant will allow that portion from your drawings of the property, that parking lot, which is necessarily huge. Chick-fil-A has offered to redo the traffic patterns. Chick-fil-A has offered to improve the parking that would still remain with that particular group. Realty Income has indicated that they would not only not have any penalty if the existing tenant wanted to go away, but they would actually help them in that particular search and move as far as possibly some sort of payment to them. They have been very difficult. The situation that currently exists is Realty Income is, I think, kind of backing away and indicating they're basically wanting to see if they realize they were bidding against themselves. And so they want to see if, by completely backing out of this thing, if perhaps the existing tenant will come to them and say, tell you what, that last offer looked pretty good. Let's see where this goes. In the meantime, we want to have everything in place. The existing tenant is indicating their last pass was that they needed the entire parking lot, Mr. Gress. Mr. Gress took these images immediately after this latest snowstorm. It does not appear that the existing tenant is needing the entire parking lot. As you can see, the entire portion that would be the new tenant's area they didn't even bother to have plowed. The only tire marks that are in it was somebody doing donuts out in the snow on this particular day. So it does not appear that they need that entire acreage for parking in front of their building. So to have everything in place when this finally goes through, it's going to be important that we are able to have a dialogue with Chick-fil-A that is X, Y, and Z are in place on the part of the city, so you can move and Realty Income can move as quickly as is possible once this goes through. So what we wanted to do, because we do not have another meeting in February, we would like to have this in place as soon as possible. So would Realty Income, I am sure. We wanted to get this in front of you tonight to give you all the chance to at least give us a thumbs up that you're okay with us bringing a formalized blight study that we would be finishing up between now and the first legislative meeting in March, so that we could have the 2 readings in March be ready to go on April 1 if there's movement on the part of the existing tenant. E.T., we won't use any names because I understand that it's Mr. Barber's favorite establishment in the city. Do you have any questions for us on any of this?
I may have missed it. Is this area in a TIF designation at all right now?
Not now, sir. We never brought either to the TIF commission or formally or to the council to make this a TIF. You'll remember the council approved and kind of put yourselves at the forefront in Missouri because TIF was formed by state statute and never actually was there a city-initiated TIF. It was always the developer coming and using TIF. This was actually the proposed first city-initiated TIF in the state of Missouri. And Gilmore and Bell was kind of scrambling on how to actually do that because they'd never been asked by any city to do it, so. First, would you have any questions on the existing tenant that we might possibly be able to answer? I can tell you there is a plan to do follow-up on a number of the violations. There have most likely been violations. There are city violations. We suspect that there are South Metro violations within the building, and we have a very, very long list of public documents now that are Cass County Health Code violations, which is a fascinating read. Sir?
In the earlier slide that Mr. Gress had just displayed, I must have not noticed it correctly. These parcels are not in the blue TIF zone?
Mr. Grass, go ahead.
So interestingly enough, this specific property that we're talking about is actually one of the only ones that's not in any incentive district. When the Raymore Galleria TIF, and I don't have the boundaries up here to show you all, but you can kind of see what was left out of this blue area, in addition to the northern part that does not include this specific property. The rest of it has been placed in some sort of TIF district, whether it's the 58 West Extended, the Raymore Galleria. There's kind of a kaleidoscope of overlapping incentive districts here. This specific property is the only one that is not within any of those right now.
Okay. So this effort is to, if I understood correctly, to update the existing TIF or
Only to update the existing blight study,
blight study with respect to
so
that
that
area.
it is in place, so that when this property goes, anything that is still standing in the way, we can say to the new tenant, all of that's been taken care of. The blight study is done. The city council has formally declared this blight. Do we know, Mr. Gress, how long that would be in place?
The blight study, you mean?
Yeah.
Once it's approved, I don't believe there's a time clock on that. And I will say, just to clarify your question, and sir, you kind of mentioned it, the ask of the kind of conceptual incentive that we've had discussions with is not a tax increment financing plan. Based on what Chick-fil-A was needing in order to make this property work for them was very minimal. And so the TIF is not an option that we've discussed with them. It's something that's a little bit different. I actually don't know if the city has used this tool before with any commercial development.
But that would be actually step 2. It would be the developer, Realty Income, and Chick-fil-A coming to the council at a later date after the blight study. Once they've gotten all these problems with the existing tenant worked out, they would be coming in and saying, we are formally asking for, and it would be the normal process the council is used to, probably something from development services going to planning and zoning, and then the actual ask that they would be putting in.
Okay. And so if I hear also, just trying to understand the process, and all the entities that are involved. The realty income, and relative to the code violations and the health department concerns, what percentage of that is tenant problems and property owner problems? Because it sounds, just to me, like it's in the property owner's best interest to not do some things that could add to the blight portion of it, and then there's some tenant concerns that the operator of the business has some issues that needs to be resolved that is not related to the tenant, the property owners.
All of the Cass County, the most significant are the Cass County Health Code violations. All of those are tenant-related. A number of our development services violations are tenant-related. I would say that there are, for instance, the sinkhole in the parking lot. That's going to be a landlord problem, not a tenant problem. But anything inside that building that is food-related or leakage-related or odor-related, all of those are going to be tenant.
Okay, and I pose that question just to make sure that we are holding the property owner to task and they're not delaying external repairs because it would benefit them in a potential blight study that it's, and I may even be articulating that incorrectly just by my lack of true understanding of the blight study. But that just as a, on the surface, that just seemed to me a question I just wanted to ask to make sure that that was.
Certainly things like the tree, the sinkhole, everything that we've showed you or talked about here, those would be landlord-related items.
What about contiguous properties? Would they be included in the blight study?
No, just the area that you're seeing here, so these two lots.
Okay. Go ahead, guys. Yeah, just chime in.
Yo, thanks. And obviously, when the Ryans went out of business and the change, that the property owners at that time, at least it seemed, didn't have much interest in developing that property. With this blight, I mean, obviously, they support this blight study, and if they do, are they allowed to split this property up? Do you believe their intention is to eventually develop that other side of that property, not to stick somebody else in it, and we have the same problem down the road?
Mr. Grass.
So I'll draw your attention, and I'll caveat this by saying this is a conceptual plan that staff has drawn up with this property. It's kind of muddied based on the labels, but it would be their intention to, at some point, not necessarily as part of this first project, would be to tear that building down and build something new within its place.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Oh, you're giving it a thumbs up. Not a question thing, it's a thumbs up, okay. Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, I've noticed many times driving up and down the street, different times of the day, different days of the week, that major lot 1 is always empty. Summertime, hot, it wouldn't matter. There's nothing in there. It never has been full. The front part by the restaurant's half full. So yeah, it's never been full. So I know that just sits empty, like you said, and I understand that. I've seen that many times, wondering how can they make money? There's no one here. But yeah, I'm for it.
Mr. Townsend?
Unrelated, but related, just out of curiosity, is the North Street that cuts from coming from the Firestone Car Wash that goes through that parking lot, is that a pass-through road, or is that considered a arterial in future developments of this? Because I use it as
It factors prominently into future developments, but go ahead, Mr. Grass.
No, I was just going to echo what you just said. It does factor into the circulation of the site, of traffic going in and out of any of these developments. It would be preserved and more than likely enhanced under a redevelopment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, further,
It's going to be, it gets used very similarly to the one that's in front of the new piece of property that the school district's redeveloping. There in front of the
yes,
old
exactly,
Orchard. Yeah.
exactly. No, exactly. And like I said, I use it when I'm leaving the car wash just to get to the light at Clint Drive.
Yeah, I think-
And I would assume that probably be this,
Light
again, not
recognition,
part of
it's not a
this.
city street, it's not a designated city street.
Exactly, because there's parking stalls right there and stuff. So I was just out of curiosity, not for this discussion. Mr. Zerscoin.
In consideration of its AM user spot, in consideration of the incredibly high traffic counts that still exist on 58 Highway in front of this. I would probably characterize this as the most underutilized piece of property that has existing development on it in the city.
And I will also point out, we've talked a lot about Chick-fil-A tonight, and they're not the only tenant that has expressed interest in this site in general. They're the ones that have had their eyes on it the longest and have, I think, done the most due diligence on it. But regardless, just in terms of the interest, there is a lot of interest out there in this site.
But they don't have right of first refusal? So if someone is more ready, prepared to put a shovel in the ground, they could trump them in this regard?
Perhaps.
Chick-fil-A is going to be an attractor to the other lot two.
Oh, I'm not
on
deterring
this.
anyone. It's just curious if there was someone to come and say, I'm ready to build tomorrow as is, would that shove Chick-fil-A off the table?
The problem is you would still have the same problem with the existing tenant,
Exactly. Okay.
if not more.
Go ahead.
You brought up a number of salient points with a focus being on Lot 1, but the old, the building that the current tenant is in is 25 years old? Jim, is that about right? Maybe more? And it was never well-maintained under the previous tenant prior to that, especially on the interior. I think maybe a coat of paint one time, and I remember that entire 2.5 decades. That alone by itself, to me, screams blight in addition to the things that you've talked about.
It, very much so, sir. The building itself, I am sure, will be able to factor prominently in not just the defects, but the fact that the building has not been updated. It is incredibly, in and of itself, underutilized. It's not highest and best use by any means.
Tom, do you have something?
I had a question. So let's say Lot M, let's say Chick-fil-A makes a move, we get this thing done. Do they want to have some type of a controlling factor on Lot 2 if it comes from the property owners now want to sell it so they can tear it down? Where they want to have some type of controlling factor to that second lot over there if that comes to fruition?
So under this particular scenario, this tenant would just be leasing this new lot from the owner, and so the current owner would maintain ownership of the entire property still. And the owner would have control over what happens on lot number 2 into the future as well.
Is everybody good with moving forward? Yep. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
What's all that? David, anything else to add?
That's it, sir. Thank you.
All right. Good go. So that was the only item really on the agenda tonight. We'll move on to other, if anybody has anything they'd like to ask or bring up at this time. If not, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.